Hello, everyone. I'm RB, Executive Vice President, Government Affairs at OUTFRONT, and I am very excited to welcome you to our Juneteenth celebration with our newest OUTFRONT X A-lister, Bakari Sellers. Sellers is an esteemed lawyer, speaker, and author. He currently practices law with Strom Law in Columbia, South Carolina, and first made history in the 2006 South Carolina State Legislature as the youngest African American elected official in our nation at the ripe age of 22. In 2008, he served on President Obama's South Carolina Steering Committee. His ability to reach across the aisle to get things done has led to numerous achievements, including being named Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 and the Root 100 list of the nation's most influential African Americans in 2015, and Historical Black College and University's Top 30 Under 30 in July of 2014. His most recent book, My Vanishing Country, became a New York Times bestseller and has been described as part memoir, part historical, and cultural analysis, illustrating the lives of America's forgotten Black working class men and women. Today, Sellers will explore the Juneteenth tradition, which commemorates the end of slavery in the US 2 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and share perspectives on history, freedom, and activism. Out front and our members out there, the timing couldn't be any better, as President Biden just yesterday made Juneteenth a national holiday. There will also be a question and answer with Bakari after the discussion. Questions can be submitted via the question and answer chat feature at any time. And with that, I turn it over to you, Bakari.
First, I am from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, Ryan, where we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad always told me that the 2 most important words in the English language were the words thank you, and they're not nearly said enough. And so before I begin, I want to simply say thank you to you all for having the willingness to invite me. Thank you to OUTFRONT for being intentional and purposeful in your mission. A lot of people talk about, doing things in the area of social justice, but not many individuals are intentional and purposeful. And so, Ryan, you deserve a great deal of thanks for that as well. To Courtney, I want to say thank you so much. You have been completely awesome. And I know the people who put these programs on don't always get the kudos that they deserve. But I do want Courtney to know that her ability to put on these events does not go unnoticed. And so thank you so very much. And to all of you all who are joining us today on this call, in the words of the great American poet, Sean Carter, also known as Jay-Z, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us today. And so thank you for finding it not robbery to spend some time here today. I think that I have to begin this discussion telling you that my heart is heavy. And individuals may ask why that is. This is just an interesting inflection point as we celebrate Juneteenth, as we go into Father's Day. But just yesterday was the 6th anniversary of the Mother Emanuel Charleston massacre. I recall 6 years ago, I was actually in Charleston, South Carolina, at a fundraiser for my good friend Hillary Clinton. And I don't know how many of you all have been in the presence of a principal or a Secret Service principal, but they have to leave the building before you can. And I recall looking at my friend Steve Benjamin, who's the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, and asking him if we could follow him and his security out of Charleston. And as we got in and we merged on to 26, I remember seeing so many police cars coming past us, so many emergency vehicles. I didn't know what was going on. I immediately called my friends who were at the fundraiser with me, and they said, we don't know what's happening. They were all in lockdown. And then we went to the 24-hour news source, which I all know is Twitter. And on Twitter, they said there was a shooting in Charleston. My good friend Tyler Jones called me and said, they shot up Mother Emanuel, they killed Clem. And for me, that was a devastating day. My heart broke. For me, my life changed forever. But Clem went out the way that we thought he would. You know, he let a straggly white boy that he ain't never seen before in his life with a book bag on come and worship with him. And Clem didn't sit him on the other side of the church. Clem set him right beside him. And they prayed and studied the Bible for a full hour. And as they bowed their head for the benediction, Dylan Roof took out a 45 caliber pistol, shot Clem in the neck, proceeded to shoot 8 others, and stood over a woman named Polly Shepherd. I call her a young woman. She gets mad at me and said that I'm going to let you live because somebody has to tell the story. I'm reminded of that story at this moment, at this time, when I speak to this audience, not to start off on a downer per se, but to help you understand that we have to put in perspective the world we live in. This is an interesting time. This has been the weirdest convergence of American historical events happening at one moment. You've had 1918, where you have a great pandemic, meets 1928, 29, where you have economic volatility. And you're like, what economic volatility? Well, some of you all know teenagers that are now multimillionaires because of GameStop stock, right? You have 1968, where Tom Brokaw wrote the book Boom because he said the country was becoming untethered along the lines of race. You had in February of 68, the Orangewood Massacre. In April of 68, the assassination of King. In June of 68, the assassination of Kennedy. All of those things, all of those years, 1918, 1928, 1968, are all happening in this one moment. And I think that it's amazing that we sit here today, gathered here today at this moment, understanding that we've made it. And I think that we have to give ourselves a pat on the back for being here together, for coming under this awesome company's banner for this event, understanding that we've made it. But I have to challenge you all today to ask yourself 2 very simple questions. And I know Courtney's going to get mad at me because she's going to be like, we brought you all the way in here and you're bombarding us with questions that are rooted in such simplicity. But I think they're necessary to answer as we navigate this journey together. And those 2 simple questions, using the framework that I've set forth, are how far have we come and where do we go from here? I think as a company, as a CEO, as a vice president, as a custodian, as an elected official, as a constituent, you always have to ask yourself those 2 very simple questions of how far have we come and where do we go from here? You know, in answering the first question of how far have we come, I think it's necessary that we use some historical context. And I'm someone who always believes that we have to look at history to kind of dictate our steps forward. I think back to 1946, and there was a man so fair-skinned that he could pass for being white. His name was George Elmore. But George was what they called a Renaissance Negro because George, he owned a 5 and dime store, a liquor store, drove a cab, and then took pictures on the side. George did all of this as a Black man in the South in 1946. And George decided one day he was going to go down and register to vote. But y'all know who are the nosiest people in our communities? Poll workers. And so when George went down there to register to vote, they actually gave George his voter registration card. But when he went to the polls, they were like, George, we know you're a Negro. You can't vote here. But George was filled with audacity, filled with strength. George actually went down and filed a suit. It was known as Elmore versus Rice. And as soon as George Elmore filed that suit in 1946, they firebombed his liquor store. They stopped distributing to his 5 and dime store. George Elmore lost everything. He literally died a financially, emotionally, and mentally broken man. But Elmore versus Rice is the reason that many African Americans can vote in primaries throughout the South. So ask yourself that very simple question. How far have we come as we're having these discussions about all of these policies and the fundamental right to vote, not a partisan ideology, but a fundamental issue of democracy? Ask yourself that very simple question. How far have we come? I think about one of the baddest women that I know, Ryan. Her name is Sarah Mae Fleming. She was 22 years old. She was what they called a 22-year-old domestic worker. She was doing that back-breaking generational labor. She was cleaning up hotels. And one day she came downstairs after work and she and her girlfriend were tired. But their sin wasn't sitting at the front of the bus, right? Her sin was that when the bus driver told her to get up and get off the bus, she didn't go out the back door that the color chose. She went out the front door. And the bus driver punched her in the stomach and rode her down the steps. Sarah, she wasn't looking to make history that day. And for all of you all who are listening, and I hope that you guys definitely throw in your Q&A and your questions and anything you have in the chat box. But all of you all listening understand that Sarah was unique because she wasn't looking to make history that day. Instead, it's like us. History found her. As John Lewis would oftentimes say, you have to walk onto the pages of history, step onto the pages of history. And so Sarah Mae Fleming, she joined with some young enterprising lawyers from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And she laid the foundation in action and law for another young lady who sat down 17 months later, named Rosa Parks. So ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? And then I think about, last but not least, I think about Harry and Eliza Briggs, who simply wanted their kids to have the opportunity to ride school buses. And so they filed a suit known as Briggs v. Elliott, and it was the first suit filed in a landmark collection of cases known as Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. And you think back to that, and Chief Justice Warren got a very rare unanimous opinion in which he held that segregation causes a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. And ask yourself that very simple question since Sarah Mae Fleming. Ask yourself that question since Harry and Eliza Briggs. Ask yourself that question since George Elmore. How far have we come as a company, out front, as execs, as customers, as a community? Ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? And I've come to the resolve, Courtney, that in my 36 years of great wisdom, that the answer to the question, how far have we come, is that we've made progress, but we still have yet a ways to go. And so now I pivot to the next question, which is, where do we go from here? And where do we go from here is probably the most difficult question that we have to answer. It's one that challenges me the most. And, you know, for me, I say that it's damn hard. It's a question that gives me the most difficulty day in and day out. I'm oftentimes reminded when I think about that question of where do we go from here, King's speech, in which he gave us two choices. He said that we could either have chaos or community. Think about that for a second. Chaos or community. And with all due respect, for those of us who I think that I Have a Dream speech may have been his best speech, I will tell you that we can fight after this. His best piece of writing was the letter from the Birmingham jail. His second best piece of writing was his book entitled Where Do We Go From Here? And he said we could either have chaos or community. And many of you all see me. I'm gonna be on CNN tonight. You see me with these crayons, and under the crayons they have it could say chaos at 1600 or chaos at the border or chaos wherever. But the challenge for all of us, and I think that we forget this many times, is to build community. And let me tell you a story. I know we're going to take questions, but I want to tell you a story about a young man as we think about this question of where do we go from here. He was born, Ryan, I don't think you're a country boy like me, but he was born at 633 Frederick Street in Denmark, South Carolina. When he was 10 years old, something happened that fundamentally changed his world. He was, I don't know if you all recall, but before you could go viral and be on billboards, but before you could go viral on IG or Snap, before you could go viral on TikTok, you went viral in Ebony magazine.
Here we are.
And when he was 10 years old, he would always say that the strongest woman he ever knew in the movement was a young lady named Mamie Till. Because Mamie Till decided that she was going to show the world what racism and hate and bigotry had done to her son, Emmett. And so I know that we're all around the world watching this, and I challenge y'all to go up to your little box and click on your screen and minimize it and go to Beyonce's internet and type into the Google bar, Emmett Till, and just look at his face. It was literally beaten beyond recognition. He had no bones left intact. This young man from Denmark, he ripped that picture out, folded it up, and put it in his wallet. It helped spur his activism. He became involved in a movement, leading marches and sit-ins in Little, Denmark, South Carolina. His parents, though, fearing not only for their economic security like George Elmore, who lost everything, but also understanding that he could be the next Emmett, decided that they were going to ship him away. And so they sent him, this is a little bit of irony, they sent him to Howard University. I don't know who wants to get their son out the movement, but sends them to an HBCU, let alone Howard. And when he got there, he befriended a man named Stokely Carmichael. Stokely graduated from Howard and then convinced this young man from Denmark to drop out of school, and so he did. He dropped out of school and joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. He got paid $8 a week, and they went to Miami University of Ohio, where they began to train for Freedom Summer. Then he got a phone call. He had to go down and find or search for 3 of his friends who had gone missing: Goodman, Sherner, and Cheney. And during the day, they would hide in barns and sheds, and at night, they would go out and look in ditches and trenches. And ironically enough, they found their bodies behind the home of one of the local sheriff's deputies and ministers in the town. And that was this young man from Denmark's first indoctrination into the movement. And then he proceeded to come back to South Carolina. He became national field director for the organization, and he became involved in the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country's ever seen. You see, on the night of February 8th, 1968, the students at South Carolina State, as it was known at the time, decided they were going to protest what the history books call the last vestige of discrimination in Jim Crow's final hiding place. It was a small bowling alley, small whites-only bowling alley. And what was supposed to happen was 3 students were supposed to go in and take a seat, and they were going to get arrested. But when they got there, the students began to clap and chant and sing protest hymns, and they were tucked back into a right angle. And as they got louder, police and city police began to surround the students. And as they surrounded the students began to press up against the glass, and the glass broke. When the glass broke, all hell broke loose, and many of the students were beaten with batons, but not normal police batons. They were about batons. They were about this long, and at the end, they had these leather rawhide whips. Students that night, they had to go back and heal not only their physical wounds, but mental and emotional wounds as well. Then came the fateful day of February 8th of 68, when the students went back to the bowling alley, but this time they got the right idea. They went back to their campus. And I have to remind folk, they went back to their campus and they built this huge bonfire. And I don't know if you all know what the temperature's like in February in the South, but it's not too cold, but it's cool. And the bonfire, it illuminated the darkness. The embers just, gradually illuminated the darkness, and the warmth from the fire warmed their bones ever so gently, because they could not foresee what would happen next. They did not foresee that South Carolina State troopers would close ranks like they did. They did not foresee that they would have shotguns that were loaded with deadly double-aught buckshots of the same bullets they used to hunt deer. And they did not foresee that for 8 seconds, shots would be fired. 8 seconds, and shots were fired into the group of students. It killed 3: Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton, wounded another 28, including this young man from Denmark. He was shot in the shoulder. And he went to the infirmary. They told him there was nothing they could do for him there. He had to go to the hospital. And when he got to the hospital, he was pointed out by the only Black sheriff's deputy in Orangeburg County at the time. And he was arrested and charged with 5 felony counts. In between the time of his trial and February 8th of 68, all the officers who fired shots were charged. They were all found not guilty. This young man from Denmark was charged. His bond was denied. He was housed on death row. He ended up going to trial where the lead investigator said they had misplaced the evidence, but they did remember him not on the night of the 8th, but on the 6th, lighting a beacon saying "Burn, baby, burn." So his indictment was backdated from February 8th to February 6th. And he was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting, becoming the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. On that night, injustice, it left mothers without their sons. It left the pages of my state's history stained red with blood. And I share that story with you guys today, because if you see him today and you see that his eyes don't pop like they once did from shedding so many tears, or his shoulders aren't as upright as they once were from carrying the burden of a generation, and you ask him what's the greatest sacrifice he had to make, he'll tell you the greatest sacrifice he had to make was not being in jail or losing his freedom per se, but it was being in jail for the birth of his oldest daughter, or my big sister. Because this young man who grew up into a civil rights hero is my father, Cleveland Sellers, and the lessons that I learned from people like him and Marion Barry and Julian Bond and many others, and come to share with you all today, is that the answer to the question, where do we go from here, lies fundamentally in the ability for all of us to rededicate ourselves to loving our neighbors even when they don't love us. It requires us to dream with our eyes open. And Ryan, even more importantly, requires us to be more intentional and purposeful in our goals and journeys like you are today. And so I know we have some questions, and I want to do my very best to answer them. But I did want to start with that brief message and just simply say thank you for having me here today.
And Bakari, thank you very much for coming today. Your words are, words that, really resonate with me, and I'm sure resonate with the team that's on this call today. We've had a, interesting, last 4 or 5 years. And I thought your question that you proposed is a very, is a good question. How far have we come and where do we go from here? But as you look back, in 2008, we had a historic election of Barack Obama, and then you fast forward, we thought, post-Obama, racial relations would have changed. Things would have gotten better. Would have taken 10 steps forward, or maybe 1 step forward, or 1 inch, depending on your perspective on life and his legacy. But, we've seen over the last few years, national unrest, the deaths of, Rashard Brooks, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Stephen Clark, Freddie Gray, Eric Gardner. I could continue to go on. So how do we reconcile, our recent history from the past? Where do we go from here?
I think that's a good question. But I think we first have to recognize that we've made progress, Ryan, and anybody who tells you that we haven't made progress is lying. That's first. And I think we have to acknowledge that. I think the second thing is there's nothing about our country that's irredeemable. And I come from a position that we just have to reimagine what it should be, a place where we all can be free. And I think if we start with that basic premise, and I think that if we start with that basic understanding, that we have to reimagine these systems going forward, deconstruct and reimagine these systems going forward. But it's hard. And so I hope everyone watching, and I hope that you allow folk at OUTFRONT to do things like practice self-care. I hope that you and we create environments where people feel it appropriate to be unapologetically who they are, to bring them their full selves, their full lived experiences to the office, to the job, to their profession, to their committee, or whatever it may be. I think that we get that value, that inherent value in that diversity. And I think even more importantly, we have to understand that we have to be better tomorrow than we were today. That's probably one of the more important notions that we can take going forward. And just as my father lived for Emmett, it's incumbent of all of us to live for Breonna, live for Rashard, live for all of those whose lives were cut short. I'm somebody who fundamentally believes that you can't tell a kid he can be a Black doctor if he's never seen one. All right. You can't tell a kid he can be a Black lawyer if he's never seen one. We have to be those examples. We have to be in our community being those living, breathing examples, living for individuals whose lives were cut short, who can't live for themselves. And I think that is an important aspect that we're missing today.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. As as a father of 2 teenage sons, and I do appreciate the fact that you brought up the letter from a Birmingham jail, and I think it is debatable between the speech in Washington, D.C. on the Mall and that incredible letter. One of the outtakes of that was quote was one of my favorite quotes, so I'll paraphrase. He says, "We're all intertwined by this web of mutuality. We're all together.
In an inextricable garment of destiny." Yeah.
The inextricable garment of destiny. And we're here all together. One of my favorite lines in that letter. And I asked my son, both of my sons, what they thought about that. What did it make them feel? And their perspective was great. It says, we're all one. We're all one people, and we need to walk together. We need to march together. We need to speak together. We need to tell the story, and we need to, most importantly, love each other and stick together. So I appreciate, what you're saying here today. And then
I think that let me just back up a little bit, because I think that folk need to remember that letter from the Birmingham jail, he was actually writing towards. He wasn't writing that to anybody else. He was writing it to other Black preachers, and I think people forget that. I think that is very significant, that sometimes you have to challenge yourself. You have to challenge those who may look like you or think like you to be better. And I think that in itself is a challenge that he stood up for. And at the end of the day, part of his death, his assassination, was because he was speaking that truth to power.
And then the last thing you mentioned, I was going to plug to our current environment. I've been very fortunate here working at OUTFRONT Media, and I think we are now becoming an agent of change. And it's good to see that corporations are, I don't want to say being woke, but corporations are now really seeing the benefits of having a very diverse group of people that work with them, because that diversity of ideas, that diversity of perspectives helps create the America I hope we're trying to get to, right? And have
I
you,
don't think anything's wrong with being hopeful, Ryan. I don't think that there's any naivete in that hope. That's what keeps me going. I have 2.5-year-old twins, right? And I think that um, maintaining that hope, maintaining that sense of um, reimagining. I think all of those things are of the utmost importance. And I think that when we lose that faith, when we lose that hope, and you got to remember, speaking of Juneteenth, I mean, we've been in this country 401 year now. And so one of the things that we've always had, even when we had nothing else, was hope and faith. And so I think that we have to live that. And I think that you're doing a great job at making sure that the next generation of leaders or the leaders of today are equally as hopeful.
well, one of my biggest takeaways today, and I'm gonna go to some other questions and answers, is next time I give a presentation or speech, I am going to mention Jay-Z and Beyonce. I'm going to find a way of working that in, and hopefully they'll think that is cool again.
Don't worry. I almost went to J. Cole, but I decided to keep it kind of top heavy.
So we do have a few questions. I know we have a few more minutes here today, Bakari. We have one question is, I'm not going to mention any names, but how do we inflect change without suffering today through tragedy? How do we inflect suffering through tragedy?
I don't know if that's possible. And the reason being is because history has taught us that any amount of political change we've had has been because of those tragic scenarios, whether or not it's 64, 65 Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act that came on the edge of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, et cetera, whether or not it's the Fair Housing Act of 68 that came after the assassination of King, whether or not it's the Confederate flag in South Carolina coming after Mother Emanuel, or whether or not it's the criminal justice reform coming after George Floyd. I mean, we just haven't proven ourselves. And I think that's our challenge, to break that cycle. I think that is the $1 million question. When do we get to a point where we can break the gridlock, where we can have people meet in the middle, where we can have, great discussions of like-minded and good-hearted people to move this country forward? I think that is the legitimate question.
Great. But we have another question, Bakari, for you. How do we ask sensitive questions in this current council culture? I believe it's about having difficult conversations and listening that helps us grow. However, the danger is how judgmental people are by just asking the question.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of canceling individuals. I think that we should inspire growth, right? I also think that I'm a firm believer that, we do have a First Amendment, and it's not absent consequence. There is consequence for your behavior or for your actions. But I think people being inquisitive, genuinely wanting to be empathetic or learn as much as possible about another culture or someone's lived experience, I don't think that's a problem at all. I think that one of the things that we have become is communities that live in our own respective silos, where we only seek out opinions and voices and news that reinforce our own. And we have to begin to have those conversations. Again, I am guilty of that, being in the 24-hour news cycle myself. But I think social media and the 24-hour news cycle have really helped destroy the fabric of what once was, and being able to have those conversations. And so I think that's part of the challenge, to begin to have those tough conversations, courageous conversations like one of the ones we're having here today.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And it's always tough, we're in a culture right now where I believe we're more divided than we are united. I do believe that the basic principles of what we're trying to achieve in life are the same. And the question, I think, is, how do we get there? Having the conversation is one thing, but having the ability to bring those conversations to reality is probably the most challenging part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for the most part, I'm not going to give everybody that credit, but for the most part, we all want to get to the same place. The question is, how do we give each other the benefit of that humanity? How do we, again, I mean, I think something that I said earlier, which resonates with me, I try to say it all the time, is you have to love your neighbors even when they don't love you. I mean, that is a difficult concept to bear, but I do think that we have more in common than we give ourselves credit for. And I think that a lot of times we just listen to the loudest voices, which many times are the people who are on the fringes of the outside of the room. And that's prohibiting a lot of the change that we want to see and that we deserve.
I couldn't agree with you more. And we have a couple more questions here. It says, how did you accomplish what you did at such a young age? What was your motivation? Was there anything that happened in your life that put you on the path that you're on?
Yeah, I think the story of my father in February 8th of 68 put me on that path. Although it was, although it was 20 years before I was born, I think that was a part of it. I think that young people change the world. I mean, with all due respect, Ryan, and you might be getting too old.
I think we have HR on the line right now, so I'm going to allow you to take that back. I am old, Bakari.
Every movement we've ever seen, the civil rights movement, women's rights movement, gay rights movement, have all been led by young people. And right now, I mean, Generation Z is so dope. They probably can use OUTFRONT for some of their marketing, because Generation Z is just a god awful name. I mean, it sounds like another bad movie. And just two years ago, we were worried about them eating Tide Pods, but now they're at the forefront of change. I think that it's a fascinating generation. I think they're not the leaders of tomorrow; they're the leaders of right now. And so, I took that into account. I asked myself, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? I ran against somebody who was 82 years old. I've been in office for 26 years when I ran. My mom said she voted for me. My dad said he'd think about it. So I had a long way to go. I knocked on over 2,600 doors. And I know that y'all live in places where y'all got like houses on top of each other, but in Denmark, that's knock on a door, drive a mile, and then knock on another door. It rained June 13, 2006 election day. And there were so many people who said, I voted for you, but I don't think you're going to win anyway. And lo and behold, I became the youngest Black elected official in the country, from a small town with 3 stoplights and a blinking light, simply because I wanted to change the world. And I thought that young people have that, I guess, that sense of self. Sometimes it's false, sometimes it's true, that we can change the world and that we're invincible. All we need is the guideposts, and my parents gave me those guideposts.
And well said, changing the world one step at a time, gracious.
Yeah, people ask all the time, Ryan, I think there are going to be some questions. I don't know that people are going to ask, how can they be allies in the movement, or how can they be helpful, and those type things. And I always tell folk, I don't need you to win a Nobel Peace Prize. I don't need you to organize the March on Washington. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And I think that we can do those little things in our casual conversations. We can do those little things in our everyday work and our everyday tasks, pushing back on microaggressions, how we treat folk who don't look like us around our kids, so that our kids are able to see how they should treat others. All of those things are important, and those are the steps we can take together. Sometimes those steps are more edifying than, going out there and doing the Nobel Peace Prize type work.
And another question is, as a father of 2 young children, what gives you the most hope for their future and the future generation? I think you might have touched on that a little bit already today, but you want to expand on, how
not only do I have 2-year-old twins, but I have with a 16-year-old girl. That's difficult, to say the least, trying to raise a teenager. But I can say that my hope comes from them. My daughter protested last summer, and everything that was on my spirit. It was also basically conflicting, because you come from a place where we come from a protest tradition, and you're extremely proud. But on the flip side, you wish you didn't have to wear a sign to reaffirm her humanity. And so that's, breaking that cycle, being proud and allowing, lifting her up and telling her that she can absolutely do and be anything and everything she wants to be, is where I come from and what I'm proud to do.
Absolutely. And we do have another question. This is, thank you, Bakari. America has obviously become a very uncomfortable reckoning with race in the many states, cities, and now the Fed. The government recognizing Juneteenth is no doubt a result of that. How do you square this moment on what we can as a company whose business is literally about talking to people and messaging to those who contribute to it? And I think we're having some technical difficulties right now. It seems that we have lost the feed with Bakari, but I'm sure our team is working. There you are, Bakari.
HR got mad at me for calling you old. They just took me to the side and workshop me already. Look at that.
Yeah, you should have said really old, and I'd been fine. But we're all good. I'm not quite sure if you heard that the last question, so I'll start it over again. Just
sure.
America has obviously had a very uncomfortable reckoning with race, and the many states, cities, and now the federal government recognizing Juneteenth is no doubt a result of that. How do we square this moment and what we can as a company whose business is literally about talking to people and messaging to those who contribute?
You got to meet people where they are. You have to give people the benefit of their humanity. You have to treat people with respect and dignity. We have to love again. We have to empower. We have to give meaning to diversity, which is not the illusion of inclusion, but actually having voices around you and listening to them and empowering those voices to do more. I think that you're in a new environment. You're speaking to a new generation of buyers, a new generation of purchasers. You know, think about this, Ryan. If you're 21 years old, you have lived through 9/11, you've lived through a housing bubble, an economic crash, the first Black president, the Tea Party, Donald Trump. You've lived through the largest mass shooting in the history of the country in Nevada. You've lived through school shootings. You've lived through a pandemic. You've lived through another presidential election, which was decently mundane compared to the one before. And murder hornets. I don't know if y'all know we got murder hornets.
Yes.
And cicadas. You've lived through all of that, and you're 21 years old, and you're having to do it under the mind's eye of TikTok, Snapchat, IG, and all of those things. And so the pressures that are there are very real. And I think that we have to do a better job of recognizing, kind of the new toils, the new reality, the new truths, the new lived experiences that people are going through. Young people now, they all know somebody who's Muslim. They all know somebody who's Hispanic. They know somebody who's undocumented. They know somebody who's gay. They know somebody so they are the most diverse, eclectic, changing. The world is changing, becoming browner. You know, all of these things are happening before us. And the question is, do you want to be a company or a collection of individuals who legislates, who operates, who navigates like it's 1968? Or do you want to be prepared for 2028? That's kind of the question that you all have to answer.
Thank you. And we have about 2 more questions here. Next question is, OUTFRONT likes to use our assets for good. Our billboards. We have partnered with organizations such as Color of Change. What more can companies such as ours do to create change for Blacks and other people of color?
I think that it's not an external issue. You're doing the work externally. I think that we have to look internally and making sure that your corporate culture is reflective. And I think having Ryan Brooks is a perfect example, but how many Ryans do you have? How many women do you have? How many people of color do you have just in the C-suites? And then looking at board diversity. All of those things are something that we should be doing. I think that both inside and outside. And so I can honestly say that you're doing the work, you're being a leader. I wouldn't be here if you were not. I wouldn't have been excited to jump at the opportunity that Courtney presented if you were not doing that work, but you have to continue to do it. And so thank you, I guess, for everything you have done and everything you are doing, but even more importantly, everything you will do.
I appreciate it. And we have one final question. I'm not quite sure you can answer this question. I'm not quite sure where it came from. Is Van Jones really dating Kim Kardashian?
I have no comment. I know Van really well.
He's an Oakland man. He's right. He's right over the bridge for me. I know him too.
Okay.
Well, Bakari, hey, I want to thank you on behalf of OUTFRONT Media. Thank you for your your leadership. And it's voices like yours that truly make a difference. It's what this generation needs. If we can't hear it, we can't do it. If you can't feel it, you can't see it. And this is what change is all about. And hopefully we'll continue to have you back for other forums like this. We had an incredible participation rate today, and hopefully everyone will take away some of the words. And I want everyone to leave yourselves with the questions that you ask. How far have we come, and where do we need to go from here? Because I think those are the two questions that we need to ask ourselves, not just individuals, but as a corporation and society. And with that, I want to say, thank you very much. Thank you to Courtney and the whole marketing team for putting this together. It's really important. And I hope everyone goes out and celebrates, what Juneteenth is all about. And with that, we'll close. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a blessed day, guys.
Have a blessed day.